Hello and welcome to the third and final part of our Q&A Shattered Lives podcast. I'm Paul Healy. I'm joined, as always, by Michael O'Toole. How's it going, Michael?
Very good, Paul. How are you? This is going really well. The last two pods have been really enjoyable. I think this one will be as well.
Yeah, and it's great to get, feedback from our listeners and to hear their, I suppose, what interests them. What I've actually found fascinating about the questions I meant to say is that people do seem to be very interested in how we do our jobs and the behind the scenes of it, which is great to see. I suppose for us, there's a lot of stuff we sort of just take for granted, but people do seem to be very interested in journalism and how it works.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is interesting.
Yeah, that is good. And I think you're right. I think we do take it for granted. I think if you and I looked back, say when we were 20, 21, and we thought we'd be doing what we were doing now, it would be a really complicated, multifactorial and possibly frightening scenario, but we're doing it and it's just our job. But I think from the outside, when you look at anything from the outside, you go, oh, that's wow.
Should we get on with them? So
this is a very good first question, I have to say.
Do you guys have protection or bodyguards? Are you able to live a normal life? Are you able to go for a pint in your local life? Have you ever gotten spotted by a person who wrote an article while in a vulnerable family situation? No, in short, but I've had incidents, I can recall a time where someone came up to me in a pub, but it was in a complimentary way. And I've had people say Healy hack to me and nothing else. They kind of just shout
Healy, let's be real. They come up to you and say, do you know Mick the hack?
No, they don't.
Yes, they do. And you told me they do, and you know it.
I've had that happen. Yes, I have had that happen. I'll come to you because I know you definitely have probably more to say on this, but
we don't have bodyguards. However, we have had occasion, I think both of us have had occasion to seek security advice from the guards and know that, I've spoken about this before. I got a gym form in 2017.
Just describe what that is.
It's the guard information message when you're told that there's information that your life is at risk. So a couple of journalists have got them. It's not very nice at all. And I was previously, we know about our colleague was threatened, and I spoke about how lonely it is. And it's tremendously lonely. And I know you had another issue as well, Paul. It is, no matter how good the guards are, you're effectively on your own. Okay. So, and there were guards around the house. There were detectives, and there was they call it passing attention. There were regular patrols around the house, and there's good security around the house. So I have had people come up to me. I remember I was in a pub in the Jacks, and a fella came up to me. I thought, oh Christ! But he just said, I know who you are, and he's saying it in a nice way. What I have found, and this is mad, for years I was quite anonymous, and I always used to say, there's two levels in crime journalism. Really, back in the day, there was Paul Reynolds and Paul Williams. So Paul Williams was the superstar crime reporter. This is in the 90s and the 90s. And the rest of us were large, and Reynolds was on TV, so everybody knew who he was. The rest of us were largely anonymous. I have to say, since I started doing the pod, I've had more people coming up to me. So a lot of people must be, looking at our pictures or watching it on YouTube. Now, they've all been
complimentary.
Yeah. But I do remember, and I've spoken about this as well, when I was confronted by a criminal, a guy called Eamon Dunn. You remember I've spoken about this?
Yeah.
So now that was in 2010. He was shot dead in April, and he confronted me in February, and he got stuck into being outside a court, and somebody had to grab him away, to take him away. He really, really got stuck into me. So, and I can remember one of the Dundons got stuck into me. We were doorstepping an airport, no problem with that. But I was just surprised that they knew who I was, because I always thought it was sort of anonymous. But now, I suppose with Twitter and all this stuff, nobody's anonymous, and we do have picture violence and all that sort of stuff. So people know who we are. I sometimes think they don't.
I most of the time think they don't. Yeah, no, to be fair,
Mm.
I've never assumed people know who I am, nor do I necessarily want them to. I've been largely able to live an anonymous life, and that is the way I keep it. We do have to take, I suppose, measures to ensure that our lives remain private. And I would probably do this whether I was a journalist or not. But I go the extra mile definitely in terms of trying to keep my social media
Mm.
profile locked down, so anything that might in some way uh identify those closest to me, I make sure that I keep all of that quite locked down for that exact reason that I try to, I am conscious of my safety in that respect. But yeah, I can go out and have a pint and have a normal
Mm.
life, and for the most part, anyone that's ever approached me, it's been complimentary, and in fair and like yourself, it's been about the pod, not about what I write in the paper.
And I no, there have been issues. A friend of mine who's a crime journalist, you got to be careful when you go on holiday, because I won't say who he was, but he was first day get into the apartment complex, whatever. Somebody saw him and shouted his name and said, "You're a bollocks!" And so for 2 weeks, that was it. So I'll tell you a funny story about personal security. Do you remember all this? I think about penalty points. A couple of years ago, people would ask me online, had I penalty points? And I would always tell me at that stage I had six, because it was two at a time. So I had six, and I proudly wore them like a sergeant's chevrons, because I never tried to get anything squared off, and I would never ask, and nobody's ever offered. But anyway, the last one I got, it was in 2012. I was under a bit of a threat then. I remember getting security advice about going off roads and coming on roads. And I thought I was being followed on the M50. So I went off at the airport, came back on, and got fucking caught at the speed camera. There's usually one there at the airport going on back onto the M50. And there's no way I was getting that, even thinking of getting that quashed or anything. So it was my badge of honor that I got three groups of penalty points, and the last one when I was under threat. So yeah, it happens.
Mm. And as you said, that experience of being threatened is quite a lonely experience. You've had it happen, a couple of times. I recall one of those times in particular when you received information that possibly someone might have it out for you, and I think you were in the office and you just went home that day, and then you were gone for a couple of weeks, weren't you?
No. I was driving into work. This is the 2017 one. It was a Friday. I was driving into work. It was the day after I won Journalist of the Year and Crime Story of the Year. So that was on a Thursday. The awards are always on a Thursday. Mm-hmm. And I was driving in feeling rather happy for myself when I got the call, because I was on the late shift, and that was it. But and it was for me, that was a very, very serious one, because that person who's now deceased was extremely volatile and very, very, very dangerous. And the advice is always, they might not know where you live, but they know where you work. So the greatest part of any area of danger for you is you going in and out of your office. So we got very good security advice, and our employers.
And he used to hang around the office, that particular guy. Yeah.
You guys all knew about it. We kept it quiet for a couple of years, really, didn't we? But you guys all knew, and somebody saw him, didn't he?
Yeah, he was in the spar shop across the road from the actual office, within that period of time where you had that threat. So it's quite a scary experience for you. He's no longer with us, as we said. He lived in that murky criminal world. But
yeah,
I haven't had anything on that level happen to me. I've been harassed, definitely. A gangland criminal was involved in a harassment campaign against me that was at the time something that was quite nasty, but look, it wasn't anything on that level of a death threat or that serious, but it was something that was a lonely experience nonetheless, like you said.
Yeah, I'm going to slightly disagree with that, Paul. I think it was very serious, and I think it was very troubling for you what was done to you, and I felt for you at the time, and I would certainly not have liked what happened to you there to happen to me. And you know what? It's the whole thing. Do we publicize these, or do we try and keep it quiet? With our colleague from a few weeks ago, it came out, and I think that's the best thing to do, because sunlight is the best disinfectant. And the number of journalists, crime reporters, but others who are threatened this, whether credible and online threats, it is, we're just doing our job, really. And people, I often say this, people think we're fair game.
Hmm. I think we're in new territory now.
Yeah.
A certain cohorts that put your face out on social media and will
Mm,
target you, and like with our colleague, try to hunt down her address,
mm.
sinister stuff like that. I guess we have to be a little bit more wary and even more cautious, especially about what we say and do online on social media in particular. Yeah, as I said, anything that from my personal life, you would have great difficulty actually finding it on social media.
And
Um,
that's one piece of advice I would give to young journalists, and I do. If you're starting off, separate it. Have a professional Facebook page or Instagram and Twitter. Put nothing up. Have a private one. Put your Irish name down or whatever. I know a lot of guards and a lot of teachers use their Irish names. Do that. Completely separate yourself.
yeah.
Do you ever? I do this. Do you ever monitor if you're being followed in a car when you're driving?
Yeah,
I
it's
do.
an extremely
I do.
paranoid thing. I have done
Yeah.
that. I have even on maybe one or two occasions been so paranoid that in the moment I changed where I was going. Just changed the route just to make sure that I definitely wasn't being followed.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a very strange thing to have to do, but yeah, I have done it. Yeah, yeah.
And I think a lot of journalists would be in the same boat. So people don't realize this. We don't like, I don't think journalists really don't like making themselves the story. We like talking about ourselves. We don't like making ourselves the story. And if only people knew the truth, what we do. I absolutely, every week I take different routes and, around roundabouts and all that sort of stuff. You do.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel for a lot for our photographer colleagues, who oftentimes, we can kind of sometimes stand in the background and not, but when you've got a camera in somebody's face or whatever, it's quite intimidating towards people, and I know that if you're in that world of crime and you're taking photos of criminals, you've got to be even more careful when you're taking
Mm.
photos from your car that you then are not being followed.
It,
That's very difficult, I'd say.
it's like even, say you're covering loyalist parades that descend into violence when they do, if and when they do up north, or riots, whatever you want to call them. I, as a journalist, I can put my notebook in my pocket, put my phone in my pocket, and just be standing there. A snapper
Mm,
can't put a 400 lens or 200 lens with a Canon body in their pocket, so
mm.
they are a lightning rod for attacks.
And we're seeing it more with now these types of I suppose protests and incidents. I remember the day of the Dublin riots. This was before it really kicked off, but
Mm.
yeah, the photographers were the first ones to start getting the heckling and the abuse. Nobody could tell who I was. It just looked like another person who was standing in the street. And I because I didn't stand with the photographers, I didn't stand out. But sadly, they had no choice. It's
Yeah.
the reality now. Shall we move on to the next question?
Yes. So this is another one. It's quite a simple one, but it's a good one. What is the best part of your job and the worst part of your job?
Hmm. The worst part of the job is I was going to say something else. I think it can be quite depressing, the subject
Mm.
matters that we cover. And it's only maybe in more recent times that I have found that I don't want to sound like I'm in any way depressed or anything. I'm not, but it does have a mental health effect that I never really took into account before. And sometimes it probably has made me a more serious person, and it can be difficult to switch off at times when you cover particularly harrowing stuff, and so yeah, I probably look at the world more cynically, and I am a more serious person than maybe some of my friends who, thank God I have them, because they lift me out of these situations. And my partner, we were thankfully able to separate work from home. Um, but sometimes you just can't shake some of the things that you cover and some of the things that you do, and yeah, I like that's probably the worst part of it for me.
It's like neither your other half or my other half are in media or in journalism. And I think that's a good thing, because you do divorce it. So I'm working away on a big story, and I wouldn't really talk about it with the family. Very, very, very rarely. Look, I agree with you. People would be surprised. I asked this. I wrote a piece of fiction a couple of years ago, and I called it Black Light. Right. Now, the reason I called it Black Light is that this hero, there was a bit of blackness within him, and unfortunately, I think I'm like that. My world is darker than the average civilian because of all the things we see and we hear about. People would be surprised, and it was only when I wrote the book and I was doing some media interviews that it really hit home about this darkness and the blackness. And I tried to explain to people, I would ask them, how many homicides, murders, and manslaughters do you think I've covered? And they would go, 30. It's probably easily 1,000, 1,200. And then you add car crashes, drownings, plane crashes, any sort of tragedies. Probably talking 1,500 or 1,600 people. And the thing is, you remember all their faces. I remember I covered Doom a Bomb. I doorstepped the families of the 3 young children from Donegal, County Donegal, Buncrana, who were murdered in that. I had to go up and knock on those 3 doors, and I got 2 of the photographs. So whenever the family gave me the photographs, so whenever the Oma bomb is, those photographs are put on the screen, and I got them. So it's not as if you cover one tragedy and you move on. You can, I bet you, if you're shown a photograph, Paul, you'll remember, I remember that child or whatever. So what really, really affects me is children. I find it really hard to cover the deaths of kids.
Yeah, and it's the relentlessness of it as well. Like you cover certain cases and then just the same thing happens again and again. The level of depravity also just seems to be getting worse. Yeah, so it's hard to cover. I find it really difficult covering road collisions in particular. I just think they're so tragic and awful. I know they're not crime, but we find ourselves often having to work on the death of somebody on an Irish road, and you get the picture, a child in particular. There's been a few of the last year and a half, really, really hard to cover. That those things kind of stick with you. The best part of the job, I could give you 2 different answers really to that. I mean, from a selfish point of view, it offers incredible freedom. Like, I am in a sense my own boss, and I'm able to, I have a boss, but I largely have.
Don't embarrass me.
It's not you. But I am afforded a lot of freedom to go and work on stories, and that's great. From a career point of view, and just in terms of, what gives me pride in this job and keeps me doing it. I've said it before. I love it when a victim comes forward to the likes of myself, and we tell their story and we expose the predator and put their picture in the paper, and it means an awful lot to them. Those are the stories I'm most proud of when I think of stories like that, where I've interviewed a victim and it really meant something to them, and it had an impact and it was powerful to them. There's an awful lot of frankly shite that we have to sometimes write and get involved with, and that's part and parcel of the job as well. But when it comes to those stories that really have an impact on somebody's life, in particular a victim of, say, sexual assault, or a family member who's lost a loved one, they've been murdered, and highlighting their story, I get a great amount of satisfaction out of that. So that's probably the best part of doing the job. What about you?
Thankfully, there are more positives than negatives in this job. So I'm going to give you a couple. I love the validation, or giving victims validation and them ringing you to thank you for the story, or even, this sounds terrible, but a sex abuse victim talking to you, and they feel, we're not counsellors, but they feel better after having spoken to us, having got it out, and unmasking people who commit serious crimes secretly, and then they're unmasked, and that gives the victims an awful lot. One of the best things about doing this job is when you hear secrets and when you hear things first, right? Do you know that feeling? Like, do you remember a couple of years ago? Do you remember this was a Friday night, Paul? There was I got a wee story about a celebrity, the one I'm talking about, who was arrested for alleged fake COVID certs. Do you remember?
Oh yes,
the Irish celebrity, right? And I can remember. It's just that feeling when you have it, right? And you know it's true, and you walk over to the desk and you see their face, and you must be something in your face because you can see their face going, what's he got? So it's just that feeling of knowing things before others. But another thing that I really love is traveling. So this job, I've seen the world with this job. Peru, I've been in Lebanon. One of the few 3 Irish journalists have been to the Golan Heights. I was one of them. I've been to Spain countless times. I've been to Italy, Czech Republic, everywhere. And that is on somebody else's dime. I'll be frank. And it is wonderful seeing the world as part of your job.
I haven't got too many of them now. Different times, I guess.
Oh, it is. Actually, in 2008, I got 10 trips away in a year. I was away for 32 days.
Just to be clear to people, anyone who has listened to this, that doesn't happen anymore. Not even really. You'd be lucky to get down to Cork now for the day.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. But you know what I mean? It is good to go somewhere and see things that very few people get to see, and it's part of your job. It's wonderful. Plus, it's good, and it's mostly with the Defence Forces, which is great as well.
Yeah. One of the best jobs I ever got, probably will be the best job I ever get. I was allowed to go over for Conor McGregor's for the first court appearance that he had in New York City, and I had 3 wonderful days in New York. But his court case, I remember, was 10 seconds long. But then the initial fear that I had was, okay, now I have to justify being here. So we actually went and we hunted him down, found out where he was, and tried to approach him and all of that, and just get more than one story so you could justify the fact that you're in New York City. But we had a great time over there, myself and another journalist.
You do. I will say that when you're abroad, you do put yourself under more pressure to deliver. You go the extra mile or whatever, and you get 3 or 4 stories rather than 1 or 2.
Yeah. Well, I was on an away gig with you in Spain. We've talked about that before.
That was, do you know what? That was great crack. Me and you and Mick. That was excellent.
That's good fun. So sometimes, yes, the job can be good crack amidst all of the dark things that we cover. You have a bit of fun every now and then.
And there's also great collegiality. We used to go down the country and there'd be maybe 10 or 12 hacks and snappers from down the country, and you'd invariably end up at the same hotel. And I think that's part of our self-healing, that we all sit around and talk shite for 4 hours afterwards. And it's great. And we might have the odd row as well.
We might. Next question. Come on, we've got loads to get through.
Okay,
argue with you.
You're next. Oh, actually, by the way, sorry. A couple of hacks I met recently said, Mick, we love the podcast, but you don't argue enough.
If they had been back when we were in the office in Talbot Street, they would have seen more than a few arguments back in the day.
Rows are good.
Well, I think we get on better than ever before, and it's because of the distance.
Well, I was going to say it's the barring order I've got. Right, go on.
Someone said, "Where's the best area to do a post office?" I'm not going to answer that one. Hi, Paul. Love the podcast. Are there many under the radar criminals in our community? Yes. Example, someone who would be living their lives normally and not on the media or Garda radar, or someone who would be on your radar that you can't talk about. Communities would be surprised if they were caught. Yes, in short, there are many times if there's someone not on the media radar, I mean, we can't answer that. But yeah, of course, there probably are more than a few people who are on nobody's radar until they get caught. The one we always do talk about and we refer to as Mr. Big is that's unfortunately the only way we can talk about him. But he has the right way, not the right way to phrase it, but he is effectively, he's on the Garda radar, but he is managing to get away with it and continue to live an ordinary life despite being probably one of the biggest criminals in the capital.
Could he walk down the street?
Could he walk down the street?
Yeah, without being spotted or going, oh, there's Mr. Big.
I think people in his locality would know who he is,
but say down Talbot Street.
Yeah, absolutely he could. Yeah, and he does.
So what I like to say in this is there are 2 aspects to this. There are myriad criminals who are not on the journalist radar. That's just it. But there are other other criminals who aren't on the Garda's radar. And a classic example of that would be Declan Brady, Mr. Nobody. Really, so he was central to the Kinahan operation. He's now renounced that in court, but he was one of the main players of the Kinahan cartel. And he was only really spotted. It's a misnomer to say that he was spotted at the David Byrne funeral. He was, but he was spotted a few weeks beforehand. I think the NSU or one of the units had him and had pegged him and were starting to work on him. But in 2015, before, I know the regency was 2016, so let's say 2015 backwards, nobody had a clue who he was. So there are plenty of people like that. So in that sense, but then that's gangland. But let's talk about other criminals. There are plenty of, fraudsters that we would know nothing about, or nobody would really know anything about, because they're just doing their stuff. They're, they're defrauding people online, or they're, these scam calls and everything. And then the other aspect is, and this is the reality, the number of sex offenders there out there, number of men who are abusing women and abusing kids and are walking down the street. And it's that whole thing about their, pillars of society. And nobody really knows what is going on in secret, because that's the very nature of abuse. So there are, without being hyperbolic, they're among us, and they can live and work in society and have a normal life.
Yeah, and there are often criminals that we would hear about, Mick. To be fair, we hear from our sources certain names, but we would never be able to publish their names. So I think that might be along the lines of what this person is asking. Yeah, like there are people whose names consistently crop up, and you go, oh, that person's doing that again. We don't always necessarily write about everything we hear about them as well. It's just we get intel, and we have, I think both of us probably have a considerable file of information about people who we should be kind of keeping an eye on, and we know the guards are keeping an eye on, but it doesn't mean we're writing about them every day. We're just aware of them. There's certainly many up and coming young criminals in the Cabra, Coolock, Finglas areas that we're consistently hearing about, who as of yet haven't committed any major crimes other than they're drug dealers. They're involved on that scene, but I hear about them all the time. And I guess we kind of keep them on our radar for that rainy day where something either happens to them or they cause something to happen to somebody else.
Yeah, no, that's true. There are people that we know about, but there has to be a threshold, I suppose, for stories. And you have a wee nugget and you file it away, and then it comes later. Here's another good one. Would you guys ever consider doorstepping Mr. Big or the family gang to quiz them on their suspected involvement in crime?
Well, I like my life, and I like being alive, and no, in short. But I mean, if a circumstance was to come up in which it may be relevant to do so, I have to be careful here. But like, for example, with Mr. Big, I think if he had put himself out in the public domain in some way, in which he could be approached, yeah, we would. Are we foolish enough to go and knock on his door tomorrow with no reason, to just start asking him about his involvement in criminality? No. What would you say?
No. We do have to be mindful of our security, and we have a thing in work called a dynamic risk assessment. So we do that all the time. So every story we go out on with the snapper was usually Mick O'Neill would sit there and go, right, for example, what's our escape route? What are the factors? Are we going to go in and knock on this door? Is it too dangerous? Is there an angry crowd outside? What's the place like? Is it worth going to do a door knock? Is it not? So, we do, we're not cops, we're not soldiers, we don't have armed protection. And our Garda contacts will always say when we do doorsteps, geez, fair play for doing that by yourself. So our safety is paramount to us. So we do have to do risk assessments. And there are some times when I go, no, I'm not going to do that. And I would say that, we have sort of tactical control on the ground. It's not our desk who might want us to do something, but only we can decide, because only we're on the ground and we know all the factors that they can't see.
Would you, in theory, if say you got, I mean, this isn't going to happen, but you got intelligence tomorrow that Daniel Kinahan is back in Dublin for the weekend, right? Again, that's not going to happen because he'd be arrested. But let's just, maybe cast it back to say it's 2016, and okay, there's an opportunity to photograph him. Would you have approached him in a public setting? Yeah. Okay, that's
but
different.
it isn't a public. It is different, and it isn't the public setting. Mr. Big and the family and all different
Mm.
profile,
Mm.
but do you not think you have to do this risk assessment, and you would go right? Even if you could decide in half a second, I think there are factors that would mitigate for our safety in relation to
Mm.
this. Firstly, it would have to be like we know that he would used to have frequented a certain hotel, would have done it there or would have done it
Mm.
outside during daylight hours, and I would have made sure that as I was approaching him, he would know that I'm a journalist because people are trying to kill him, so
Mm.
he has to worry about his own safety. So there are lots of factors that would go into that, but yes, I would.
Mm-hmm. And like when it comes to this person cited the family and Mr. Big as examples, look, those are people that are very much under investigation. They have not yet
Mm.
been convicted of any major offences. And so, even if we were to approach them, there's very little for reward for the risk that you're taking. Because in fairness, what are you going to be able to write about them unless they come out and say, yes, I am a major criminal, and like from a legal perspective, even it just isn't worth it. So until those people, the likes of Mr. Big and members of the family, are actually convicted of major offences, and we can name and shame them in the media, there's very little point. Forget about your safety even for a minute. There's very little point even legally in going there.
But I do think that we do. People probably should be aware of this. There's no blanket or uniform approach. Everyone is on its own merits, and
Yeah,
you and your colleague have to decide on the ground.
yeah,
Nobody else
yeah,
can.
yeah. And I mean,
Anyway,
yeah, your safety is your most important thing.
that's it. Okay, you next.
Um, why was there a pre-trial for the Ashling Murphy case? Why was it not reported in the media, even though it was not held in camera? Um, it's often the case that there is a pre-trial hearing. In fact, there's usually a pre-trial hearing in a murder trial or any kind of jury trial. So journalists would have sat in the pre-trial hearing of Ashling Murphy. I think it went on for 2 weeks. They would have sat every day in it, and they would have taken notes, detailed notes of everything that was heard. But the law does not allow you to publish the details of a pre-trial hearing while that trial is ongoing. Pre-trial hearing is obviously when the prosecution and the defense kind of hammer out what the jury are going to hear, and what the judge ultimately makes rulings on, arguments that are made between the prosecution and the defense, about what they want them to hear. And if you were to report on that at the time, you would scupper the whole trial. So to be fair, that's why it wasn't reported on at the time. But after the trial has finished and a person has been found guilty of an offence, you can then report on what the trial maybe didn't hear, what the judge ruled out from the pre-trial hearing. So there isn't anything stopping you from reporting on the facts of the pre-trial hearing post-trial after the person has been convicted.
So, just for wider context, if I'm correct, pre-trial cases really it's quite a modern thing. So, say for example, like we were covering trials before, there would be lengthy breaks for legal argument. Say, I remember during the Joe O'Reilly trial, there was a big legal argument in the middle of the case about whether or not the phone evidence could be brought into evidence. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that went on for a good couple of days. So the aim of these pre-trial things is to hear most of the legal argument before it happens. Now, simple reason why it can't be written about is we can only write what the jury hears.
Yeah.
And that's it, because everything else is prejudicial. So we got to do, it's very, very simple. Court reporting is very simple, apart from the special. You write what the jury hears, nothing else. And if you stick with that, you won't get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, but it can be written about after the trial.
Oh, yeah, but once the jury don't have seizure of the case, then you can do whatever you want. But it's only when the jury, before or during the trial, or when the jury have the trial, you got to just stick to what the jury hear, and that's it.
And I think, in fairness, I may be corrected on this. I mean, I covered most of the Ashling Murphy trial. I think even though the defense tried to get this, that, and the other not heard by the jury, virtually all of it was allowed in.
Yeah.
So, in the end, um, there isn't really anything of substance that you could say, oh, this is something that was said in the pretrial hearing that the actual trial didn't hear. Everything was ultimately admitted into evidence.
Oh yes, but the defense, and that's their job. Their effort was to try to get various things
Yeah.
not given to the jury. But look, so that's just basically it. It's a way of speeding up the process rather than you start a trial and then you take a break for a
Mm.
week for legal argument and everything slows down. So you get it all out of the way. They go at it in front of the judge. The judge makes a decision, and then the trial starts with the jury. So it's I think it's quite a good process. So that was from
Hmm.
a lad called Christy Roach who said it's okay to use his name, and he's got another one. I was recently on jury duty. Noticed almost all the cases that we encountered were sex cases. When we finished early on a few days, I went around the CCJ, and in nearly every court that was in session, colleagues of mine, there was a sex case. A colleague of mine was also in jury and noticed jury duty and noticed all the cases in her time were sex cases. It's massive. It is
Yeah.
absolutely massive. I remember talking to I could say a paedophile hunter guard, I remember him saying, Mick, it's just everywhere. I'm going to be a bit direct here. He said, you could be taking your kids out. Your neighbor could be standing upstairs,
Mm.
waving at the kids with one hand and he'd be pleasuring himself secretly with the other. He said, it is just everywhere. Just, you don't realize how big the whole issue of sex crime is. And, an awful lot of the problems is that many of the sex cases are anonymized to protect the victim. We know that, and during trials, when you're accused of rape, you're not allowed to be named by law. After you're convicted, you can be named if that doesn't lead to the victim being identified. But in a lot of cases, the victims can be identified. So that means I was going to say the accused, but the convict cannot be identified. It's just the number of sex abuse cases is huge.
It's massive. I mean, I'm even just thinking of last week when I was in a rape case and covering it on that particular day. There were, and this was only for sentencing. So, the court was largely taken up by lengthy sentence hearings. There were five others
Yeah.
they were all rape cases, every single one of them. And I was sitting next to a reporter who covers that court every day, and she was showing me her list for the week. And every single one, I mean, there were just countless. I mean, 10, 20, all rape cases. And that was just that week alone. So
I,
it's rampant. Absolutely.
I don't know who you were talking to, but there's maybe it was Isabel Hayes, was it?
It was Isabel.
Ah,
Yes.
right. Yeah.
Yes.
No, the reason I can say that is because she put a post up on LinkedIn where she listed all the court cases, just one after the other after the other. And you know what? That doesn't even take into account the what's legally known as child pornography or child sexual abuse material. The number of cases there, and I know that the vast majority of them walk out with suspended sentences, but it's every day there are people caught with serious amounts of child sexual abuse material. It is really, really shocking.
Mm-hmm. And now even that reality has to be reflected in our prisons. I mean, Arbor Hill Prison is exclusively sex offenders, but they also now have to have sex offender wings in different prisons because they can't put them all in Arbor Hill. So, I mean, there's an entire wing in the Midlands prison, for example, where they're now housing some more serious sexual offenders. Yeah, they have to also keep them separate from the other prison population, and yet they don't have enough room for them. There's that many.
It is hiding in plain sight. It really, really is. Just back to what that guard says. I mean, he dealt with this, and he said it's just a huge, massive problem. But people think it's a victimless crime. But hey ho.
Next question is by Alison McCulloch. She's also happy for her name to be used. She said, if lawmakers gave you the opportunity to introduce or amend any law in the country, what would it be? Well, one that absolutely I would amend tomorrow, and thankfully the government are already now having this conversation about doing so, is minimum sentencing. So I do believe that for more egregious, serious offences, a judge should have the power to say, and that person should serve. So when they give them a life sentence, that the judge can say, and that person must serve at least 20 years in prison before they can be considered for parole. At the moment, so our system was incredibly archaic. It was 7 years. After 7 years of a life sentence, you could apply for parole. Now it's up to 12. And then after every 2 years, they can apply for parole. But yeah, on average, you still wouldn't get out until 19 years at least. But if only a judge had the power to say, for the likes of a very serious criminal who has committed the most egregious crime, this person has to serve 20 years, 30 years, or an entire whole life order. It always seems like we're copying the UK, but it works over there. For some of the more serious crimes, a person can be given a whole life tariff. I'd introduce that tomorrow if I could.
Well, I'll talk about something that I've just spoken about. It's called, legally, it's called child pornography. Mm-hmm. And I would have the law amended to get rid of that horrible phrase and made it, child sexual abuse images or child sexual abuse material. I'd also make it, the guards have a scale, and there's an international scale. I think it used to be called the Coping scale, but that was 1 to 10. I think that it's been brought down, so there are grades to the level and the nature of child sex abuse material. I think it's 1 to 5, and 5 is the worst. I won't talk about what that is, but you can just imagine it's really, really bad. Okay. So I think that if you're caught with the worst grade, I think you should be jailed. I think it should be a mandatory sentence for anybody caught, because it is kids being tortured, right? And if you think that's not common, it's common. Okay. People have them in Ireland now. Hundreds of men have them in Ireland now, maybe thousands. Okay. Have access to those videos and stuff. So it's not a victimless crime. And people, there should be consequences for what you do. And I think for the most egregious child sex abuse material, you're going to jail.
Mm-hmm. I think I would agree with you on that as well. But our main problem is, if you were to lock up every sex offender in this country, I don't think you'd have room anywhere else. They're going to have to build more prisons. I think you're calling it child sexual abuse material. I think that's the way it should be referred to. Calling it child pornography, it does minimize what it really is. So I would totally agree with you on that.
Okay,
next
another one.
Question.
Any updates on the cargo captain? I'm presuming that's the MV Matthew. Is he still locked up? Yes, is a simple answer. And it's going to the special criminal court. So there's not going to be any jury. So we have a little bit of freedom about this. We wouldn't really be able to talk about this were it going to the normal courts. But the maximum penalty, there are serious penalties for people caught with significant amount of drugs. I don't think anybody's ever been caught with whatever, 250 million, depends how you weigh it out and that sort of stuff. So he's in serious trouble, and he is still in custody. And depending on the special criminal court, I think he'll be in custody for quite some time.
Interesting. We got to fly through a few more of these. We're 40 minutes in, so let's get them. Could you discuss collusion between Gardaí and organised crime? There
is an anti-corruption unit, it's recent new thing, and it's set up to investigate corruption within the guards. Nothing wrong with saying this. And we were at the press conference. It was Chief Superintendent, I've forgotten her name, and I asked her, are you investigating links with organised crime? And the answer came back was yes. So there was a couple of cases where Gardaí were investigating other Gardaí for organised crime. I'm old enough to remember there was a Garda in Tala many, many moons ago, 1996, who was connected to the Gilligan gang. I remember that there have been at least one Garda who was done for links to the Provisional IRA during the Troubles. Guards, remember I said this about the Defence Forces, they reflect society. Journalists reflect society, and guards reflect society. There will be bad eggs in the guards. Now, when the guards find out who they are, they go after them. But it's nothing, I don't think it's anything that it should surprise anyone that people are, within the guards are suspected of being involved in criminality. That's what the anti-corruption unit's for. And whenever the guards do have evidence, they go after them big time. They don't leave them alone.
I think now they do. Yeah, I think the game has changed. I know that a lot of members of Garda Síochána do feel like the anti-corruption, that there is maybe too much of a focus on at times, that it tarnishes them all with the same brush. But I think were it not for that and some of the investigations over the last couple of years, you wouldn't have had seriously corrupt and seriously morally corrupt Gardaí. I'm thinking about a couple of assault cases recently where Gardaí were, done for assaulting their partners or other women. I wonder if you've gone back even a decade, would those cases have been brought to court? We're in different territory now. I'm also thinking of the ongoing investigation and the charge that was brought against the retired superintendent John Murphy, for example. I mean, he is being investigated for his connections to Jerry the Monk Hutch. He was found with six-figure sum worth of
Mm.
cannabis and was suspected of being involved in drug dealing, and he's now in prison. He was probably one of the most senior and I would say even respected members of An Garda Síochána, but um, the vigors of the law came down upon him as well when he was found to be involved in wrongdoing. So, it is great to see that they will go after their own when they do commit wrongdoing, and it stains all of their reputation. So I know that I would say there's very little sympathy for the likes of John Murphy now or anybody of his ilk.
About any criminal, and I can remember years ago, a Garda was done for CSAM, right?
Hmm.
And then another Garda was trying to meet a child. A couple were convicted. I have never heard any guard have any sympathy for any of those criminals.
Yeah.
They regard them almost like traitors. I was like, fuck them. Whatever they get, they deserve. So there's nobody going, oh, the poor devil.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. How is the value of drug
Ah,
seizures calculated?
yeah, this is
I
interesting.
Go ahead. You're
Well,
good at this.
there's a European body. I can't remember what it's called, but they, decide a kilo. Let's talk about cocaine, right? Let's talk about the MV Matthew, because this is where I differ, but I'm allowed to differ. So they would say, I think at the minute it's roughly 70,000 euro a kilo. Okay, so the customs and the Gardaí would say with MV Matthew, I think it was 220 million. Was it?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I differ greatly, and with respect with the guards and customs. Their customs did say what I'm about to say. So cocaine brought into Ireland is uncut, largely uncut. There's a high level of purity. So 1 kilo, right? And I always remember a very senior GNDU precursor of Doc B telling me this. Every kilo of cocaine that is brought into Ireland, you get 3 kilos out of it. So it's cut. They call it cut. So they put in, lignocaine and all that sort of stuff, right? So by its very nature, if you're smuggling cocaine in, it makes sense to cut it after you smuggle it into Ireland, because it's logistically easier to bring in 1 kilo than 3, or 100 kilos rather than 300 kilos. You know what I'm saying? So I always multiply the value of seizures impounded by the naval service or whatever, like the MV Matthew. So in my opinion, the MV Matthew's real value is 600 million, but the guards say 220 odd million. But does it not make sense that when it comes into Ireland, it'll be cut so you have more kilos out of it? So that's where I differ. And I've always differed from the guards. And whenever I do a seizure like the MV Matthew, I always go, well, actually, this is what it is worth. It would be worth on the street, because it doesn't make sense that you get 80 or 90% pure cocaine like that on the street. No, they're cut up financially. Even the gangs want to get as much money as they possibly can out of it. So I've always differed from the guards, but that's what they do. There is a European standard on this.
Interesting. I think you've answered that better than I could. When do you feel most afraid in the job? This person asks. I suppose we talked a bit about safety already, kind of. So this might sound a bit repetitive, but when do I feel most afraid? I suppose, yeah, when we are threatened, or when somebody in some way who has serious sort of criminal connections comes after you. That's when we most feel afraid. And I talk about. I don't want to give too much credence to this incident that happened to me, because I don't want to say, oh, I was terrified or I was afraid. It's just that this person was involved in gangland criminality. So I took what probably would have from anyone else not being that serious. I took it slightly more seriously, because I was like, well, this is somebody who actually could cause me harm if he saw me in the street. And so I know that they were spoken to by Gardaí, and that it was dealt with, and thankfully nothing came of it. But I did worry and think about that worst case scenario, and I thought about the people closest to me in my life, really, and just about the possibility of, if anything serious ever did happen and I brought it to their door, I wouldn't be able to forgive myself for that, you know. So like that, I feel most afraid about the possibility that the job could have an impact on those in my life. And if it did, if it really, really did, I I I wouldn't continue to do it, I don't think. So that'd be my biggest fear. What about
First
you?
death threat. I remember about the first death threat I was guards were involved with. My wife was heavily pregnant at the time with her first. It was 2005, and I had to sit down and get her to sit down and tell her some fella's trying to kill me or some fella's threatening to kill
Mm-hmm.
me. It's shit to have to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
and there've been a couple, and the guilt that you feel when you do bring it on your loved ones is completely appalling. Um, but but people don't realize, there are high danger ones which go off without a hitch. You could do what you consider a normal doorstep in some middle class area, and you get your bollocks kicked in. It can be like that. You never know what's on the other side of the door. So I have a healthy fear of my surroundings, and you're constantly hypervigilant. I think if you have a blasé attitude going into anything, you're in real trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But most importantly, I get very, very frightened when I'm having to put my expenses in.
Very good. You want to
Any
read the next
journalist
one?
will say that.
Read the next one there. Go on.
What would you do if you did not do crime? I mean, by that, I think if they did not cover crime, we don't do crime. Although some of your writing is quite criminal. But anyway, go on.
You are looking for an argument.
Sure, why not?
I used to think I wanted to be a political correspondent. I have great respect for political reporters, but I couldn't do it. Now, I used to think that's what I wanted to do. If I didn't do crime journalism, I don't know at this point what if I'd go back to be a news reporter. So I wouldn't be a reporter at all. I probably it's going to sound a bit mad, but I think because I've interviewed a lot of people and dealt with a lot of really heavy stuff, I've always been very interested in the human mind and how people think, be it, a psychopath or be it someone who's suffered abuse or whatever. So I would have loved. I don't now have the intelligence to go back and study, but I would have loved to have gotten into psychology, to have studied it as a degree, and to have been a psychologist. Yeah, maybe in an alternate reality. So
Right.
yeah,
Well, do you think that's mad? I would like to do something around death if I wasn't a crime reporter. Maybe
like
an
what?
undertaker. Maybe an
Undertaker.
undertaker. Yeah, no, and I'll tell you why. Um, I'll include you in this. I think a lot of reporters have an ability to talk to people about death
Hmm.
and to. I remember my father died. I said this, but my father died suddenly in Tunisia in 2001. Right. I remember somebody in work who I was very, very close with didn't commiserate with me, and I realized that he could not talk about death. Right.
Mm.
And uh, it's a skill and a gift, I think, to be able to be empathetic with somebody about death and even to
Yeah.
sit down and listen to them. So I've always thought, yeah, I could do that, be that empathetic aspect. Even my mother died 4 years ago, and the undertakers were fantastic. And I remember thinking at the time, not a lot of people can do that. And that's something I would do.
Interesting.
Mm,
I think our skills are quite transferable in one sense,
mm,
Yeah, like I mean, we deal with really heavy shit.
we do.
That's why I say the human mind fascinates me, and why some people end up in certain circumstances and others don't. But anyway, that's another life. What are we on to now? Is there a story that you wish you had the scoop for anywhere in the world, as well as Ireland, all subjects, not just crime? I had to think about this, and anytime anybody gets a scoop, I'm like, damn, I wish I had that. The person who most gets a scoop, and I go, damn, I wish I had that, is Pat O'Connell in the Sunday World. I think he just gets. I look up to everything that he's done. I think he gets all those phenomenal scoops, and I think often of the scoop that he got with Sam Eid. So the hitman who was hired by Sharon Collins to try and kill her then partner and his sons, and he got the first chat. If tell me if I'm mistaken, but I think he did get the first chat with Sam Eid. about the fact that he was hired by Lying Eyes, Sharon Collins, and he just got the whole scoop, and it was a fascinating read, and he had multiple scoops in relation to that story. Um,
Uh,
yeah,
excuse me.
I'd love to have gotten that story. Go on.
I broke that fucking story.
Oh,
I
what?
broke that story,
Well,
right?
he had the interview.
Yeah, but I broke the story
Yeah.
about rice. And I remember somebody saying to me, Mick, you're not going to believe it. Essentially, Assamid was in
Mm,
custody in Limerick on something else. And
mm,
the Army Ranger Wing, not the EOD team, the fucking Army Ranger Wing were sent in all
mm.
their heavy gear because they had rice in a contact lens. I broke that story, right?
Oh, sorry.
Pat O'Connell used to be my Paul Healy. Pat worked with me in the Star before, even done the things different. Yeah, Pat's fantastic. I have to say, look, I've done this for 30 years, right? There's not many stories that, how can I say this? I've got more than enough scoops of my own, right? So I'm more than comfortable with the stories I've got. Now, but that's on the macro level. On the micro level, I hate it when anybody else gets this story. I wish I had got this story last year about this fella in GSOC going to a party with Jerry Hutch.
Yeah.
No,
Yes, well,
it's
that
like
was a great story.
it's like
Yeah.
Gore Vidal saying, is it Gore Vidal saying, when somebody else does well, a little part of me dies. So look, Stephen Breen, who, oh, Jesus, I should tell that story. Stephen Breen in The Sun is my frenemy, right? My journalistic hero is a guy called Tom Brady in the Irish Independent. Every morning, I would get the Irish Independent on the app or whatever and go, what has Tom got now? Right? I do the same with
Hmm.
Breener every day.
Hmm.
So, I don't like anybody beating me.
Hmm.
So there you go.
And it is before my time, but I couldn't have got it. But I've always been, I always thought that Paul Reynolds' interview with the monk
Ah, yeah.
was incredible, a great scoop, and it still to this day is fascinating to watch. And Watergate is the one that inspires all of us. I love that. Like yourself, the movie All the President's Men, it's very inspiring. It makes you realize what it is to be a journalist. It is a very inspiring movie and story, and to both of those journalists, Woodward and Bernstein, are incredible. I actually saw them talk a couple of years ago, and they remind you of what it is to be a journalist. Yeah.
I subscribe to the Washington Post purely because of
Mm,
those two men.
mm,
It's 90 quid a year. And I go, they are what I've, noticed that in my past and stuff.
mm,
They're why I'm a journalist, really.
mm,
And it's not even the two of them. It's Bernstein,
mm.
right? Really? He's my, he's, when I
He's
thought
your
I'm going to be a
hero.
journalist. Well, yeah, I'm going to be a journalist. It wasn't Bob Woodward. It was Carl Bernstein, right?
Yeah.
Who was played by the Dustin Hoffman character in the
Hmm.
movie.
Mm.
Writing bits everywhere, all over the place. Not academically gifted, a bit of a talker. I
Mm.
wonder who that. Anyway, so
Mm.
I've obviously modeled myself on him. So that's why.
They're still breaking stories in their 80s.
That's it.
Yeah, right. Next, let's finish it up. Next question.
I think it's the last question. A detailed discussion from arrest to being charged in court to sentencing might be useful. I think that's over the whole incident of our colleague a few weeks ago being threatened because people didn't realize what happens when news reports happen. So I think some people, and actually, because when I explained, look, we put the names in and addresses and ages in case there are two Paul Healy's or two Michael O'Toole's, as you explained before. So I think people are confused about what's the start of the process and what's the end of the process, even just a couple of minutes just to explain.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you're first charged with an offence, you have your sort of first hearing where
Mm.
the facts of the case are heard in terms of a prosecuting guard. It gets up onto the witness stand and talks about so it informs the judge of the time of arrest and the time of the charge and the caution. And then they say what the person says after caution. So after caution, they made no reply is usually what you hear, but sometimes people say, I didn't do it or whatever. But on legal advice, most people say no reply or they don't respond. That's what the court hears. Then there's an argument from the defense, and there's a talk of legal aid and then bail. And if a person is granted bail, there's usually granted bail on conditions, and then it's put back to the next hearing, or they're remanded in custody if there is argument against bail and the judge accepts that. The next part in the process then is, you want to talk about that?
Judges, the DPP will decide, is it a summary matter or is it a matter on indictment? Now, obviously, murder, manslaughter, rape are indictable offences, but the DPP can decide, say if you're charged with assault, it could be a Section 2 assault, or maybe even Section 3. The judge could go, right, the DPP could go, right, we want this to be kept in the district court, which is a summary offence, which carries a maximum of a year in prison. There have been plenty of cases. There was a case last week where a judge looked at the evidence and went, no, I'm not dealing with this. This is going up to the higher court, which is the circuit court. So that makes it 5 years, for indictable offences. Most of them, you can, obviously murder and all is different. So, and
then it ends up before a jury if it's in a circuit.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So the judge in the district court deals with the BAMS, him or his or herself. Indictable, it goes to judge and jury. But even, I'll just talk about the very, very briefly, and then there's the trial and everything, right? But even brief, before the charge period, guards can hold you, usually under the Criminal Justice Act, which is 24 hours. And the way it works is you're detained for 6. They can hold you for 6. Superintendent has the power to give you another, to extend by 6 hours. And then the final 24 hours, it has to be the chief superintendent. So there are lots of checks and balances along the way.
Mm-hmm. And that can be frustrating when you're a reporter trying to cover these things, because it's a very, very long process. I mean, after the initial appearance, then there is the book of evidence. Is the book of evidence ready? And then when that happens, it's sent forward for trial. Then there is what's called the arraignment. And in the arraignment, you have the opportunity to plead guilty or not guilty. If you plead guilty, it could be dealt with there and then on the day, and you're sentenced, or it's put back for another day and you get sentenced. If you plead not guilty, then it's put back for trial. And that process could take months or even years, especially post-COVID. And then finally, when the trial happens, depending upon the nature of the crime, can take days or weeks.
And final thing I'll say on it is, if you are convicted and you are sent to jail, people often read about this. He got 12 years. He or she got 12 years. Always take 25% off of that, because every prisoner is entitled to 25% standard remission. You can go for 33%. That doesn't usually happen for sex offenders, but if you're in for 17 years for armed robbery and you do well in prison, you can get a third knocked off. And also, if you're in custody between charge and conviction, say you're in for a year, the sentence is backdated to when you go into custody. So I always try to explain how long they will serve from the day of the sentencing, rather than the sentence itself.
Hope that's a good answer, as detailed as we can get it anyway. This was a marathon one, so I think we'll leave it there.
We could have broken it up in 2.
We could have. Listen, thanks to all our listeners for all of your great questions. Of course, you can ask us questions anytime. We'd be happy to answer them in future podcasts. So thanks very much for listening.
Thanks, everybody.